5 things to learn from ATIKU's fuel subsidy proposal. According to the Punch newspapers, the presidency has criticized former Vice President Atiku Abubakar's proposal to restore petrol subsidy if he wins the 2027 presidential election, describing it as retrogressive and fiscally unsustainable. The presidency is also demanding that Atiku explain how such a subsidy would be funded. 1. Subsidy can give immediate relief, but who pays for it? The strongest argument for subsidy is simple. Cheaper petrol can reduce transportation and business costs and give struggling Nigerians some immediate relief. However, the government must explain where the money will come from. Objective criticism: it is not enough for either side to say, subsidy is good or subsidy is bad. Nigerians deserve the figures. How much will it cost annually? Where will the money come from? And what other government programs could lose funding? 2. Atiku must explain the change in position. The presidency argues that Atiku previously supported subsidy removal and is now proposing its restoration ahead of the 2027 election. But changing a policy position is not automatically wrong. Politicians can change their minds when circumstances change. The real question is whether Atiku can convincingly explain why he has changed his position and provide evidence that his new proposal is economically workable. 3. Nigerians should also question the current policy. This debate should not become simply TINUBU versus Atiku. The government removed the subsidy in 2023, but millions of Nigerians continue to complain about the high cost of transportation, food and other essentials. Therefore, the government also has a responsibility to demonstrate clearly what Nigerians have gained from subsidy removal and how the savings are being used. The organized private sector has also warned that returning to the old subsidy system could increase fiscal pressure and discourage energy sector investment. 4. The real solution should go beyond petrol price. Whether subsidy returns or not, Nigeria's deeper problem is low purchasing power and high production costs. A sustainable government should focus on local refining, reliable electricity, mass transportation, agriculture, infrastructure, and policies that reduce the cost of doing business. My criticism: politicians should stop presenting petrol price reduction as though it alone can solve Nigeria's economic problems. 5. Nigerians must demand a complete 2027 economic plan. This is perhaps the biggest lesson. Before Nigerians support any presidential candidate in 2027, they should ask: how will you fund your promises? What will you cut? What will you invest in? How will you reduce inflation? How will you create jobs? And what happens if your projections fail? The presidency has challenged Atiku on the funding of his subsidy proposal. Atiku, in turn, has an opportunity to respond with detailed figures rather than political slogans. Akayi News Analysis Verdict: the subsidy debate should not be about who can make the sweetest promise to Nigerians. It should be about who has the most credible plan to make Nigeria's economy work. If Atiku can demonstrate that a targeted, transparent and affordable subsidy can protect vulnerable Nigerians without creating another fiscal crisis, his argument deserves serious consideration. But if the proposal is merely an election strategy without clear funding, it deserves criticism. And equally, if the government insists subsidy removal is the right policy, Nigerians have every right to demand measurable evidence that the sacrifice is producing better economic outcomes. That is the real issue Nigerians should be discussing ahead of 2027. For more on this update, visit www.akinews.org. 5 things to learn from Russians withdrawing billions from banks. According to the Telegraph, Russians are withdrawing large amounts of cash from banks amid growing fears that the Kremlin could freeze or seize private deposits to help finance the war in Ukraine. Russian central bank data reportedly shows 286.4 billion rubles, about $3.4 billion, withdrawn in just the first 2 weeks of August, following major withdrawals in June and July. 1. Trust is the foundation of every banking system. When citizens begin taking their money out of banks because they fear government action, the problem is bigger than cash. Objective criticism: fear alone does not prove that the Kremlin is about to confiscate deposits. But the scale and persistence of withdrawals show that confidence in the financial system is under pressure. 2. War eventually affects ordinary people's pockets. Russia has spent heavily on its war effort, while economic pressure, sanctions, labor shortages and high defense spending are creating increasing strains. The lesson is simple: a prolonged war is not only fought on the battlefield, it is also paid for by the economy and ultimately by citizens. Economic analysts cited by the Institute for the Study of War say Russia's war spending is crowding out parts of its civilian economy. 3. A bank run can create the crisis people fear. There is an important irony here. People may withdraw money because they fear banks are unsafe. But when millions of people simultaneously withdraw their savings, banks themselves can face liquidity problems. So fear can become self-reinforcing. Loss of confidence, right pointing arrow; withdrawals, right pointing arrow; pressure on banks, right pointing arrow; greater fear. 4. Russia's economy has not necessarily collapsed. This is where objective analysis is important. It would be misleading to conclude that Russia is already facing an immediate economic collapse. The available evidence points to serious financial and economic pressure, but not necessarily an imminent collapse. The Institute for the Study of War similarly assesses that Russia's economy is unlikely to collapse rapidly without another major shock. Therefore, headlines predicting an immediate Russian economic collapse should be treated cautiously. 5. The biggest lesson is the cost of prolonged conflict. The Russian situation demonstrates how war can gradually weaken confidence, increase government financial pressure and change how ordinary people manage their savings. ATIKU Master Analysis Verdict: the most important story here is not simply that Russians are withdrawing billions. It is that economic confidence can become a strategic vulnerability for any country fighting a prolonged war. And for Nigerians watching this development, there is a broader lesson. Government policies that affect citizens' economic confidence must be handled carefully, because once people lose trust in an economic system, rebuilding that trust can be far more difficult than maintaining it. For more on this update, visit www.akinews.org. 5 things to learn from ATIKU's attack on Obasanjo. Former Vice President and ADC presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar has dismissed former President Olusegun Obasanjo's electoral influence, arguing that Obasanjo could not win his own state or the Southwest in 1999 and that northern support was crucial to his emergence as president. The statement comes amid their renewed political disagreement ahead of the 2027 election. 1. Political influence is bigger than winning an election. Atiku's argument focuses heavily on Obasanjo's 1999 voting figures. But electoral value is not measured only by the votes a politician personally receives. Obasanjo's political influence today can come from his national profile, relationships, experience, and ability to shape public debate. So Atiku's claim may be politically useful, but it does not automatically prove that Obasanjo has no electoral value. 2. Atiku has a valid point, but the argument can be challenged. It is fair to examine Obasanjo's actual electoral performance rather than treating him as an automatic kingmaker. However, there is an obvious question for Atiku. If Obasanjo has no electoral value, why does his endorsement or rejection generate so much political attention? That contradiction deserves serious consideration. 3. Bringing up 1999 may distract from 2027. Nigeria is preparing for another presidential election, but this argument is largely about what happened 27 years ago. Objective criticism: Nigerians need to hear more about today's problems: economy, insecurity, unemployment, education, healthcare, and the cost of living. A presidential candidate should spend more time explaining what he will do differently in 2027 than fighting political battles from 1999. 4. The North alone did not make Obasanjo president. Atiku's statement highlights the importance of Northern support, and Northern votes were certainly significant. But presidential elections are won through broad national coalitions, not one region alone. Reducing Obasanjo's 1999 victory to Arewa made him president oversimplifies Nigeria's complicated electoral history. 5. Nigerians should judge politicians by what they offer, not their quarrels. This may be the biggest lesson. Obasanjo and Atiku have had a complicated relationship since their time in office, and their latest exchange risks becoming another chapter in a long-running political dispute. But Nigerians preparing for 2027 should ask a more important question. Who has the credible plan to solve Nigeria's problems? Akahi News Analysis Verdict: Atiku may be correct that Obasanjo's electoral influence should not be exaggerated, but saying he has no electoral value is a much stronger claim that requires more evidence. And if Atiku wants to convince Nigerians that he is ready to lead in 2027, his economic program, security strategy, leadership team and record should speak louder than his ongoing war of words with Obasanjo. In politics, attacking your opponent may generate headlines, but solving Nigerians' problems wins trust. For more on this update, visit www.akahinews.org.